Okay, so I'm Greg Hart, owner-manager of Mungarara Station, which is just over 600 hectares of mixed hill country farm in central Hawke's Bay near the village of Alsthorpe. Farming here with my wife Rachel. We have 3 children, aged 16 and 2 14-year-olds. The farm is of 600 hectares, is 470 hectares effective grazing land. We have a 30 hectare lake on the property, and the rest of the area is used as with trees, including native forest and some commercial plantings that we've done on the farm. We are predominantly running cattle on the farm. At the moment we've got just over 600 head of cattle. Most of those are Angus heifers that we're raising for supplying butchers in Auckland and in Hawke's Bay. We also have a mob of dairy heifer grazers, and through the spring months we've been rearing calves by milking a dozen or so dairy cows, and also feeding a few pigs and chickens, which adds to the madness and fun around here, because we also have an eco lodge that is used for sort of farm stay accommodation, but it also doubles as a place where we can have workshops and education opportunities through the lodge. So our journey into regenerative agriculture started about 20 years ago, and it was at the time that we had our first child, and also learning a lot about some big changes that are happening on the planet at the time. So one of the things that got us thinking about this was a quote by Professor Albert Bartlett from the University of Colorado, and one of his saying was, the biggest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand exponential function, which basically got me thinking about how the scaling up of things is just happening all around the world, and we're using resources, and in the not too distant future we're going to be hitting a whole lot of limits for basic resources. I guess one of those potentially is fossil fuel oil, and then thinking about sustainability of New Zealand agriculture and understanding that pastoral agriculture in New Zealand, which is still the backbone of the New Zealand economy, is relying on bringing in phosphate fertilisers from North Africa with a whole lot of energy bundled up in digging that phosphate up and processing it and getting it to New Zealand and getting it onto our land, and it just didn't seem a sustainable thing to be, or way of producing food, or producing the income for our economy that's going to last long into the future. And so that sent us on this journey of trying to figure out another way to produce food and earn an income without those long supply chains and lots of inputs going into our farming system. So and also at that time, with our first child, you start to think about the food that you're feeding them, and understanding that there is some issues with some of the food that we're doing. There is, I guess it's fair to say, an epidemic basically globally, and particularly in Western worlds, with a lot of diabetes and chronic diseases, which have just basically really taken off over the last 20 or 30 years. And so that has a lot to do with the food that we're feeding our children and to people. And so with the understanding of health, for human health, and also sustainability of our food systems, realised that there had to be some pretty big changes. Okay, so we've had a pretty long journey to get to where we are now, and there's been a whole lot of learning along the way. It has involved doing courses with overseas experts like Darren Doherty, Graham Sate have been sort of big influences what we've been doing on the farm. Joel Salatin and his farm, Polyface Farm in Virginia, America, has also been a big influence, and also Mark Shepherd, who's the author of a book called Regenerative Agriculture. And just understanding these principles, and also understanding how much energy is going into producing our food, has really got us thinking about the way we produce food on the farm here. So where we've got to now is regenerative agriculture, which is primarily focused on the soil, and I see it as a way of mitigating climate change, because through holistic grazing management and other regenerative agricultural techniques, we can sequester carbon from the atmosphere and store it safely in the soil, where it's not only benefiting getting carbon from the atmosphere, but it also is increasing the moisture holding ability of those soils, so making the soils more resilient. So regenerative agriculture is primarily soil focused. Secondly, we're all about increasing biodiversity on our farm, and we've done that through a lot of tree planting that we've done, both forestry blocks but also agroforestry and silver pasture type systems that we're running, and also leaving space for nature and regenerating some of the native forest and planting new blocks of native on the farm, which is just increasing the whole biodiversity of not only the plant life but also the bird life and insects and everything. So really just seeing life explode on the farm, and kind of one of the core principles of our farm is all about optimizing life. And it's a really good thing to be doing in this day and age, where every time you pick up the newspaper you'll be reading about things that are being degraded and systems collapsing and what have you, and basically our world is all about regenerating and making the place better. And so that's a pretty cool thing to be doing at the moment. So we've got our regenerative agriculture about soils, we've got it about biodiversity. Another outcome of having those healthier, more humus, more carbon in the soil is that it is the Earth's natural filter and produces clean water. So we're going to have benefits on the water outcomes. And the other thing is really around reducing the amount of off-farm inputs. So while we don't have all the solutions and probably never will, but understanding that we are using a lot less fertiliser, next to no other chemicals on the farm, some animal health products still going into lamb and beef production, but really minimising our inputs and trying to create that healthy environment that keep soils, plants and animals healthy, so they don't need those outside inputs. So probably key to our regenerative approach to farming is our holistic grazing management, which is all about mobbing our cattle up into bigger mobs and shifting them daily and having higher pastures that they go onto. So with our holistic grazing management, we're aiming to eat about half of the pasture that's in front of the cattle. They'll be trampling some of it and leaving some of it. And so then it's a longer rest period before the animals come back onto that same pasture again. And that's all about really optimizing the photosynthesis from the leaves of those plants and grasses and herbs, but also it's around managing the root mass of those plants, because if they're severely grazed, then at that time they'll also be shedding roots and losing their energy. I mean, we consider our grass as a solar panel and the roots of the grass basically as the battery bank. And if we are taking off that solar panel and then also correspondingly losing most of the battery bank at the same time, then it's going to take a lot longer for the grass to grow big and establish its roots. And so it's just slowing down that natural process. And so trying to keep those grasses longer and growing fast as much as we can. Globally, one of the leading figures in regenerative agriculture is an American called Gabe Brown, and his 5 principles of regenerative agriculture are firstly to keep an armour on the soil, so keeping the soil covered, because that's basically what nature does. And secondly, it is about minimal disturbance, and so we don't want to be ploughing the soil and turning it over and losing carbon and breaking up a lot of the damage to the soil microbes. So we've pretty much put away the plough on this farm, or we have. And then it's about keeping a living root in the soil all the time. And then there is principle 4 is around diversity. So the more diversity that you can have in the plant life that you're growing in your pastures, the more likely you're going to have a diverse microbe population in the soil. And so diversity is a key point for regenerative agriculture. And then fifth and finally, it's about incorporating animals, because we need animals as part of the system for what they do, for their grazing and for the dung and manure cycling, which helps the whole system work. Probably the biggest difference between what we're doing here and what a lot of our neighbours are doing is around the pasture management and having taller pastures and leaving probably higher residuals. It's probably the biggest difference that we're doing, and we've been doing that for over 5 years now and seeing some really good results from that. And our soils are definitely we're getting the darker, richer soils, which is also showing that we are going to be able to retain more moisture. And the other thing, being in Hawke's Bay here, where we do get the dry summers, having more cover gives us more grazing going into summer, and again it's keeping the soil covered, and so there's going to be less risk of losing moisture through evaporation, and just gives us more flexibility to carry more animals. So we've got 3 very distinct land classes on this farm. We have about 40 hectares of peat flats, and then there is about 220 hectares of rolling hill country, and then another 200 hectares of steeper hill country. And so I guess the awareness is that different classes of animals on the different classes of land, we are prone to getting very wet in the winter, and so keeping the heavier animals off the country that is more at risk of pugging. But we do minimise that a bit by having the taller pastures. Again, you're keeping that layer and protecting the soil from the animal hooves going directly into the soil. So that's another benefit of the higher pastures, is that you are also protecting them from the wetter periods of the year, as well as giving the soil cover and reducing the amount of evaporation that you'll be getting in the summertime. So we definitely believe that grass grows grass, and we're seeing some really good pasture growth rates on the farm, and also by moving the animals on frequently, they're not going to be overgrazing their favourite tastiest grasses, so it gets grazed a whole lot more evenly. And we would never leave animals on a paddock or on a pasture for more than 3 days, because once they've had a nibble of their tastiest little grass, it might start to grow again, and it gets nibbled off, and so that's really going to reduce the energy going into growing that plant. So definitely trying to avoid that. So it's a really exciting time for regenerative agriculture. It is taking off globally. You've got some big global corporates getting into it now, with like Danone, the big dairy company, General Mills America. They're all sort of making a push towards regenerative agriculture. And then we've got the Savoury Hub, who have established the EOV, or Ecological Outcome Verification. So putting some measurement around this, and I think this is the next opportunities for New Zealand, is to put that line in the sand, because every farmer I know is looking after the land to the best of their ability, and nobody purposely sets out to degrade it or pollute waterways. And so knowing now that there is techniques and systems that we can use that are going to regenerate the land, if we put a measurement in place and take some soil recordings, biodiversity recordings, and also water coming off the land, we can put that line in the sand and just show how we can be improving our land. And that's not only what everybody is wanting for the outcomes for our future, but also it becomes quite a strong marketing tool. And so farmers are feeling challenged at the moment by a lot of new laws coming in around greenhouse gases and around some of the clean water legislation. And I really do believe that regenerative agriculture has the solution to a lot of these challenges, and through a regenerative approach to our soils, but also including trees as part of our agricultural landscapes, we can be sequestering way more than 100% of New Zealand's greenhouse gases. And basically I see farmers as being the heroes, because if we are going to negotiate and mitigate climate change and a whole lot of resource depletion and a whole lot of other issues, then it's going to come down to the way we grow food, and it's going to be up to farmers to sequester that carbon, grow healthy food, and basically steward us into that new future. So I see this as a massive opportunity for New Zealand. We're the best placed country in the world to do this. We already have this amazing environment, and we have these really engaged farmers, and basically if we can't do it in New Zealand, then who the hell can?